This is the story of riding my bike from Jasper, Alberta, Canada to Antelope Wells, New Mexico, along the Great Divide. In the previous episode, my friend Tracy joined me for 2 weeks. We rode from Bannock State Park in Montana through Idaho and Wyoming and into northern Colorado. In this episode, Carl and I experienced the highs and lows of Colorado as we continue our journey south from Kremmling, Colorado until the border of New Mexico. This morning, I scored a bagel and cream cheese from the motel breakfast bar and packed it in my back pocket for lunch. Carl and I continued our journey south, leaving Kremmling on a gravel road with steady climbs and overcast skies. Eventually, we reached the Henderson molybdenum mine. We saw part of the 15-mile conveyor belt system that extends through a tunnel beneath the Continental Divide. Later, we were treated to fast-rolling pavement and a big climb, but at a reasonable grade. I zipped down the descent, and then it was bagel time at the bottom. After lunch, Carl and I rode into Silverthorne, stopped for some chocolate milk at a convenience store, then enjoyed a gorgeous town trail that followed a river where people were fly fishing. We climbed up to the rim of a reservoir, then the trail took us all the way into Frisco. As we rode, Carl marveled at how humble the Colorado River appears in this part of the state. I discovered later that trout fishing is supposed to be excellent where the river runs past Kremmling. I should say, this part of the trip was more heavily populated and there were fewer practical options for camping. We had looked into warm showers hosts as well, with no luck. It was such a different experience from other parts of the trip. Look at here, they rolled out the red carpet for the cyclists and the bikers. Don't you dare come in our lane, cars. In Frisco, we stayed in a rather nice hotel for just $104 a night. Carl and I had some Oaxacan food at a local restaurant that was my best meal of the trip so far. I enjoyed swimming in a hot tub back at the hotel while waiting for my laundry, and we resupplied at the local grocery store. It was a good day. My legs felt sluggish over the first 10 miles from Frisco to Breckenridge this morning. Almost the whole route was on town trails or marked bike lanes. We stopped for a big breakfast of pancakes at the Columbine Cafe in Breckenridge. After that, we were well fueled for the beautiful and relatively easy, just a 3 to 4% grade, climb up Boreas Pass. Locals warned us repeatedly about the dangerous and rocky descent down from the pass. In actuality, it was a lot tamer than many of the downhills we had encountered so far. After crossing the mountain, the vast South Park area stretched out in front of us. It was a return to scrubland and rolling hills. The wind was at our backs and we sailed quickly downhill. As we rode through the grassland basin, we could see storms scattered around us. I wondered how long we would continue to dodge the rain. Finally, just as I stopped to pick up my stem bag that had suddenly dropped from my bike, it started to rain. I threw on rain gear and we continued on. It pretty much cleared up before we reached the town of Hartsel. Frisco to Harzel today. Carl and I took pictures to celebrate our accomplishment of reaching the top of Boreas Pass. Carl informed me that one of the few cabins at the top of the pass serves as a winter ski hut that people can book. While the descent was relatively tame, I did get stung by a bee on my earlobe. I imagine the poor thing was just hanging out, minding its own business, when this machine came whipping through its airspace. It had no option but to attack, right? This was actually my second bee sting on a descent. My earlobe doubled in size from the swelling. Hartsel is a town at the intersection of both the Great Divide mountain bike route and the Trans Am race. So bikepackers are regulars through this town during the summer season. And while most towns along the route we'd experience seem to embrace our tourist dollars, Hartsel had a different vibe. Carl and I had planned to camp behind the bar in Hartsel, as suggested by the ACA guide. There were two problems with that plan, though. The yard was a complete mess due to Hartsel Days, which was just wrapping up. Garbage was piled high, picnic tables were pushed aside, and the ground was scattered with mud puddles from the previous rains. Rowdy drunks filled the bar, ready for more celebrating. The other problem was, just as we arrived, the skies opened up and dumped on us, starting with hail. We'd heard that other Divide riders had stayed in a covered pavilion in Hartsel before. I went to the firehouse to ask permission. They flat out refused. No camping in the pavilion, is all they said. They didn't have to help us. Of course they didn't. And in the end, we got a shuttle to Fairplay where we booked a motel and then shuttled back to the route in the morning. But after so much hospitality all along the route without even asking for help, I was pretty surprised at the refusal of what seemed to be a simple request. It felt like there was more to the story that I wasn't privy to. On the way to Fairplay last night, we saw a car accident, and the police were speaking with two bikepackers at the side of the road. This morning, we'd heard that Jay Peterberry had been hit by a car just south of Hartsel yesterday. Carl and I were feeling stressed. We took the shuttle back to Hartsel as planned and ran into our friends Trevor and Chris, who we'd met at Brush Mountain Lodge. Turns out that they had endured the sloppy, noisy behind the bar accommodations and also had talked with the bikepackers we'd seen the police questioning. The bikepackers said the accident was caused by a car that swerved to miss them after passing another car. Trevor and Chris then shared that they had received stern warnings from Fire and Rescue in Hartsel to avoid the ACA route today because the road was washed out from the overnight storms. I had a difficult choice. Go against the warnings and ride the route, or take the road, which could be just as dangerous. I knew Carl would choose to stay on the route. I decided to ride with Chris and Trevor into Salida. Chris and Trevor are brothers, born 8 years apart. They didn't become close until Trevor was in college. Chris lives in New Jersey and Trevor lives in Boston. They saw a documentary about the Divide and Trevor said, "Want to do this?" They bought their plane tickets, which was, they tell me, pretty much the most planning they did. Other people I've met have their route meticulously planned before they arrive in Banff. There's all kinds of ways to ride the Divide. One is not more right than the other. The road to Salida was almost all downhill, and it went fast. Chris, Trevor, and I stayed close and looked out for each other as we hugged the white line with our tires. In no time, we were in Salida. Last night, Carl and I met for pizza in town, where we had a front row seat to a drenching downpour that briefly created raging rivers in the streets. The finale was a gorgeous rainbow as the sun reemerged. I enjoyed a cool walk back to our hostel and watched as dozens of vultures spiraled up hundreds of feet over the city. Here's what I did in my full rest day in Salida. Laundry, of course. Went grocery shopping. Bought and shipped a birthday present for my son. Ate tacos. Watched river surfing. Napped. Did yoga. Napped again. Met Carl for dinner. Pizza again. Got a scone from the Red Hen Bakery. Talked with my friends Carrie and Greg about meeting up in New Mexico. And planned my route. It was a good day. This morning we climbed out of Salida on what turned out to be the same road, Highway 200, that I descended last summer on the last day of my Vapor Trail bikepacking trip. Marshall Pass was perfect, easy grades, beautiful and wooded, with spectacular views of aspen forests and mountain peaks. Descending was windy, and I got my first puncture. Carl and I got it plugged okay, and we continued to the Tamichi trading post, where we had a hearty lunch. Several miles later, we met up with my friend Eric, who joined us for 20 rolling and windy miles. Finally, Carl and I reached the Upper Dome Reservoir and set up camp. Eric moved to Colorado from Minnesota last year. He's the person who helped me purchase and set up my bike, so it meant a lot to me to be able to share part of my trip with him. He met us with some cold drinks and added some much-needed sealant to my tire. I was so inspired to hear about Eric's move to Crested Butte, Colorado. He'd moved out there without any set plans and found a perfect job managing a lodge, which offered him room and board. He was meeting all kinds of interesting people there, going for epic rides in his spare time, and just appreciating the gorgeous mountain landscapes. Eric's energy and enthusiasm made the hard, windy miles go by quickly, a welcome distraction. Where he left, we had just 6 more miles to the reservoir. Carl and I set up camp quickly. I bathed in the lake, we ate dinner, then we called it a night. I'm exhausted, but I know I can do it again tomorrow. We started our ride on a gravel road in the Cochetopa Wilderness area. The grade was perfect, and the pines and aspen provided us with some shade. We learned at the top of the pass that it was a historic stagecoach trail. We descended until Highway 114 and rode for 5 miles or so before turning onto another gravel road, which was the start of Canero Pass. I really enjoyed the rocky top buttes and bulky canyon-like formations. The climb continued for many miles at a 3% grade before it took a nasty turn and got steeper, leveled out, then got steeper again. When I struggled up to the crest and saw the sign, I exclaimed, "Mother effing Canero Pass!" A Japanese GDMBR rider we met at the summit laughed. Next, we were treated to a 15-mile descent through high plains and canyon-like formations until we got to La Garita for lunch. You could see the great sand dunes in the far distance. Next was a dusty, bumpy stretch of road that steadily climbed into the wind as we worked our way up over a pass to Del Norte. As a special surprise, the road veered off onto a wavy, smooth, 2-track downhill that gave me all the mountain bike vibes. But that dumped into an extremely washboarded, chunky gravel road that skirted 3 sides of an airport. Urgh! Until we finally turned onto tar and headed into town. This morning there was frost in my bike bags. I could still see the full moon before the sun came up. Maybe that's why I'd heard so many coyotes howling last night. At the campground this morning, I met a couple of guys from Georgia who were super friendly. The younger guy, who was maybe in his early 30s, said it was the first time he ever woke up in the West and that he would never forget it. The older guy said he'd been coming to this campground for 30 years to hunt elk. He was curious about the GDMBR and even wrote it down so he could look up the route. He said that his son rode mountain bikes in the Georgia Knife League. I appreciated their interest. Leaving Del Norte this morning, we caught up to Divide riders Linda and Ronnie from the Netherlands. Linda said they got a late start because at 4:30 a.m. a raccoon got into their panniers, undid the clip even, and ate their bread and some other food. They had to make another run to the store when it opened to replenish their supply because the next days are so remote. As we started the climb up the highest pass on the route, Indiana Pass, I looked at all of the reds and yellows on my elevation profile, those that have more than a 7% grade, and told Carl I'd meet him in Platoro. I've learned by now that I need to walk steeper grades because the gearing on my bike is a 1-to-1 ratio, not great for climbing. At the top of Indiana Pass, which doesn't have a marker, a text pinged in from my husband Tony. I decided to call him while I ate a Nutter Butter bar. It was great to hear his voice. He found where I was on the tracker and zoomed in on Google Earth to see what it looked like. I had a strange sensation of him actually looking down on me in real time by satellite. Finally, I hit the final descent into Platoro, except there was a grand finale. This was the steep and very rocky Stunner Pass. This one I didn't know about, so it was a real disappointment. I was just 5 miles away from our cabin that night, and it was another 3-mile climb. I swore, but started pushing my bike until the surface improved enough to ride. I did it, again, and descended for real this time into Platoro. Riding, or walking, at my own pace turned out to be a good call. Once again, like when I started this route, I was in control of my own pace and brakes. I stopped for breath, I walked, I took photos, I ate regularly, I listened to podcasts. By now I've learned that no matter how daunting the climb, I'll always get there if I keep moving. Carl was waiting in Platoro with a cold 7-Up for me. He said he'd arrived just 20 minutes earlier. I am more sore tonight than I have ever been after a ride. Everything hurts. I even asked the owner of our cabins, the Platoro Lodge and Cabins, if I could hop on his golf cart to the laundry building. I know that I have to get up tomorrow and climb 4,500 feet more. Every day is hard. Today's ride along the valley from Platoro was one of the most beautiful of the entire trip. The road followed the sparkling clear Canero River that winds through the Rio Grande National Forest at the border of the South San Juan Wilderness. Though we saw people fishing and hiking, the area had the quality of being relatively undiscovered, and it's a place I would love to go back to explore someday. We stopped for lunch in Horca, Colorado, then began climbing La Manga Pass, which would take us into New Mexico. All along the river today, we saw people camping and fishing. I looked longingly at the people who could stay there and enjoy such a pretty place. In Horca, we saw a sign that said, "Great Divide Bikers Welcome," so we stopped. We bought some Amish hand pies and sodas, then went next door to the Red Bear Welcome Center to get some burgers and tamales. After lunch, we immediately launched into a steep tarmac climb. Carl quickly got ahead of me. I kept stopping to catch my breath. Things felt harder than normal. My nose was running more than usual, and my throat felt increasingly scratchy. I hadn't slept at all the night before. I pushed on to the top where Carl was waiting. At this point, we were supposed to turn off the main road and enter the outback for 2 days with no services. Fearing I was getting sick, I decided to continue without Carl to Chama, New Mexico, so I could get medicine and rest if I needed it. Little did I know that I would become so sick I'd be off my bike for the next 4 days. Coming in the final episode, I recover from illness with some help from my friends. My bike gets a gearing makeover. I get passed by Lachlan Morton and discover something about myself when I decide to quit.
Just like a new day, a breath of fresh air in my life. I don't know how, don't know why, but I'll be toasting all my life.